Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to our panel. So this amazing group of women presented a similar panel last November at the Western Society for Physical Education of College Women's annual conference. Later that day, the keynote speaker, Sarah Fields, told me that we needed them to speak at NASH, and she didn't have time to organize it because she was in charge of the whole conference. I knew I couldn't let Sarah down, and luckily, Maria was already talking with the group about oral histories and a future article on the cotillion. We teamed up, and the rest is history. So for the last few months, Maria and I have had the distinct pleasure of engaging in some very fun Zoom calls with this group, talking and laughing and thinking about the cotillion and pre-cotillion with the women who organized them. We never got to attend a cotillion, but we wish we had, and we are so excited to welcome this panel to NASH.
Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. If you haven't done so already, first, I saw some of you in the back. Make sure you check out the artifacts that are on display. You'll have more context for appreciating them after the panel is over. The Amy Morris Homans Cotillion was born during a time, the 1970s and the 1980s, when the context for LGBTQA+ people in the US was changing, as many pushed hard for recognition of gay and lesbian identities and against the homophobia of the period. We know that where homophobia thrives, it creates homonegative and heteronormative environments, thereby institutionalizing oppression and colonizing LGBTQA+ individuals. These oppressive environments have existed and continue to exist across society, including in sport, higher education, and our professional organizations. We've seen myriad examples: negative recruiting in women's college basketball, lesbian coaches who remain deeply closeted for fear of losing their jobs, lesbian professors who risked retention, tenure, and promotion if they dared live openly, and LGBTQ individuals who rarely experienced or experience a sense of safety and belonging while attending their academic conferences. The history that our panel is going to share with you is the story of the Amy Morris Homans Cotillion, a safe space, as well as a challenge and a disruption to the homophobic and misogynistic oppression that involved personal and political boldness, and maybe above all else, radical acts of collective joy. Here to tell you their stories of the Amy Morris Homans Cotillion are our esteemed panelists. I'll introduce them in the order they'll present. We have with us in person Jackie Hudson, retired from CSU Chico. On video, we have Emily Wookhalter from San Jose State University, and Bobby Bennett, retired from San Francisco State University. And then here in the room, Karen DePaul, who is retired from Virginia Tech University. And then in video footage, you will see Linda Zwerin from Hofstra University, who passed away earlier this year in February. After all the panelists present, we'll open up the room for Q&A. Jackie Hudson, please start us off.
Gracious good afternoon. Among many things, this is a story about containment. Containment in actions, attire, ideology, sometimes externally imposed, sometimes internally chosen, sometimes detrimental, sometimes beneficial. Let's begin about 150 years ago in an era of emergence. According to Victorian custom, proper women were expected to wear tight corsets and long dresses and to marry and bear 10 to 12 children. With their displaced organs, compromised breathing, and frequent headaches, women appeared to be a sickly lot. In fact, many authorities warned that women were too sickly to benefit from higher education. Nevertheless, several women's colleges were established and a group of new women emerged. They were intelligent and educated ambitious, and egalitarian. Most new women were single and supportive of each other. That is, they were kindred spirits. Given the gender segregated spheres of the time, they worked and often lived in what we might call women's space. In addition, many of them developed romantic friendships with each other that were known as Boston marriages. Amy Morris Homans was an exemplar of this period. She established the Boston Normal School of Gymnastics to train women for the new profession of physical education. She was stern, demanding, indomitable, and always extremely proper. Ms. Homans and her cohort of new women helped to demonstrate that exercise and higher education were mutually beneficial for women. In a cocoon of women's space, her students were able to shed corsets and many layers of superfluous clothing, engage in strenuous exercise, and dance like no man was watching. By 1920, women had shown unexpected competence in men's arenas during World War I. Gertrude Ederle had set her first world record and was soon to create major anxiety by swimming the English Channel faster than any woman or man. Sexual mores changed with the flapper culture. It was time for a backlash, and the era of gaslighting began. Freud's writing on homosexuality became widely disseminated in the US through the popular press. Novelists further entrenched the idea that homosexuality was pathological. German sexologists took the side of nature. That is, a lesbian was an invert, a man born in a woman's body. The best outcome in this case was pity. Freud and his cohort took the nurture side. Traumatic girlhood made a woman a lesbian, but at least this could be fixed, they said, with extensive talk therapy. Everyone agreed, however, on what characterized a lesbian. Basically everything on the new woman list: intelligence, education, ambition, spinsterhood, and affectionate friendships. Such women were mannish, the code word for deviance. Thus, a simple and accurate stereotype was created, and fear was instilled culture-wide. Women who had just yesterday been paragons of Victorian virtue were suddenly made to feel sick and dangerous as they internalized the gaslighting stereotype. Now that most sport was considered mannish, excellence in sport especially so, our leaders did their best to shut down elite level sport lest it cast a bad light. They doubled down on the Homans' propriety through self-policing in terms of dress, demeanor, and living arrangements. In short, the cocoon of women's space was traded for a closet. No woman, regardless of practices or proclivities, was immune from the potential taint of lesbianism. Ultimately, this level of self-imposed constraint could not hold, especially given the cultural foment of civil rights, women's lib, and gay lib. Thus began the era of pride, sort of. For instance, pride was in short supply when Billie Jean King was outed as a lesbian by her hairdresser in 1981. Her reaction was to cling to her husband and deny her lesbianism. This lingering overhang of disrespect for lesbians in sport necessitated high-stakes survival tactics by many in our field, and therefore a slow reaction. Perhaps it was time to reestablish a cocoon of women's space where everyone could be liberated and enlivened. And so the cocoon became a cotillion. To be continued.
Emily Woodcoulter is next.
Thank you, Maria. It's great to be here. Thank you, everybody that's here in our presentation. Wow, do we have a story to tell? A story of change, secrets, and dance. a story of sisterhood and professional belonging. The story represents our lived experience and our personal perspectives emerging from our position and according to where we were sitting or dancing in the room. I'm Emily Wall-Coulter. I've been a professor at San Jose State University for 32 years. Prior to working in California, I spent the first 10 years of my career as a professor at New York University from 1981 to 1991. I'm a baby boomer originally from New York City. I came out as a lesbian with my first female partner in 1971 while in high school and while we were still living in our parents' apartments in the Bronx. I never questioned my coming out, and I am now married to my female partner of almost 39 years. Though at the time of coming out, I lived a secret life with family and most people outside of a relatively small lesbian bubble. I already had a strong bond with other classmates who were also evolving as lesbians. Eventually, I came out to my family and my parents prior to their deaths, which gave me the power to swing the closet door wide open. As a person of good fortune, I have mostly found myself in places where my sexuality and gender identity have not been questioned, nor was I ever made to feel limited by colleagues, either locally or globally. These experiences gave me a strong sense of self as a lesbian woman. Fast forward to 1982, and I find myself with a doctorate in motor learning and my first tenure track position at NYU, which is located just blocks away from where the Stonewall riots happened in 1969 in the heart of Greenwich Village. Prior to the Stonewall uprising, Greenwich Village was very well known for its openness to LGBTQA+. And in fact, NYU is a very welcoming place for LGBTQ+. The program in physical education at the time was situated in the Potpourri School that included education, occupational therapy, nursing, and applied sciences. And what I found at NYU was that many of the men in this school were flaming queens. They were out to the faculty, administration, and students. And some women were out lesbians too. I was beginning to regularly attend the AFERD National Convention to present my work and become involved in professional service through the organization. I've studied physical education and now, of course, kinesiology, beginning with my undergraduate degree almost 50 years ago. I became part of the pre-cotillion suite, I think in the second year, about the spring of 1983. With the exception of a couple of more AFERDs, which I didn't attend, I was part of the whole core group that hosted the pre-cotillion. I also attended almost every cotillion across approximately 30 years. At the same time, I service in the National Association for Girls and Women in Sport, and the research consortium began, and I eventually served as an AFERD governor. Now, I want to make this clear to the audience. I am only an historian because I lived it, not because I'm a scholar of history. I recognize this. Just to confirm, on Thursday, there were two events scheduled: the Amy Morris Homans Pre-Cotillion and the Amy Morris Homans Cotillion. Over the 30 years of the pre-cotillion events, many women were involved in arranging for a suite, often in the convention hotel, that we shared across 3 to 5 days or most of the convention time. The pre-cotillion was held in the suite in the late afternoon on Thursday for women to mingle, eat peanuts, and drink beer, wine, and soft drinks in some of the most beautiful hotel suites in major cities of the US. And because of a set of unusual circumstances, one year, some of us got to stay in the president's suite at the Sheraton in Chicago. That was truly a beautiful place. The suite served two purposes. First, it was large enough to accommodate 100 or more women, especially after we rearranged the room furniture. And second, Strong, powerful women in their fields were there to analyze the events of the day and critique each other's work as we went live. Our sisterhood continued to grow. One year, the female bellhop in a Portland, Oregon hotel took care of our every need and might have lost her job because of the huge number of women who exceeded the capacity of a very large suite and spilled into the hallway. The police actually came to stop the party. Then the Amy Morris Holman's Cotillion was the second event of Thursday evening. Jackie Hudson coordinated the event for all 30 years. She pre-arranged with the owner or manager of the local women's bars. At the Cotillion, we danced. Jackie made sure the music was right and that our group would be cared for, even though we had some close calls. Each year, we would wait for an email flyer just days before departure to the convention to find out what bar we were going to for the cotillion. And I'd even print out a few to distribute at the convention, and then we danced. Every Friday morning, most of us would get up early to make either a 7 a.m. breakfast or a meeting when our adrenaline was still so high from the happenings of the night before, reminiscing about who attended and how many attended that year. At the National Convention, the celebration of women continued when NAGWS held most of its activities, including the Rachel Bryant Lecture and the NAGWS Awards Luncheon on Friday, where 200 to 300 women gathered for a banquet-style luncheon with outstanding female athlete honorees. Here was a professional networking place where for many women, their personal identity was off limits. The closet was deep. Some of the unspoken rules that I understood were not to ever discuss female partners or ask about their personal lives in front of other affinity group members or beyond the boundaries of the pre-cotillion or cotillion. The pre-cotillion and cotillion events allowed for a secret underground network of strong sisterhood to emerge within a large and traditional professional organization without its support. To the best of our knowledge, neither the pre-cotillion nor the cotillion events ever appeared in the AFRID Convention program book for their entire run. Some of this appears to be because of the decision-making of our leader, Jackie Hudson, and her decision to maintain its secrecy and thus allow more women to feel free to attend. When AFRID attendees and some others were not associated with the cotillion realized what we were doing, the secret, we were subject to the white male gaze, so eloquently discussed by Bobby later in her paper. A couple of questions for you, and I honestly don't expect you to answer the questions, nor do I want you to raise your hand. Did anybody in here ever attend an Amy Morris Holman's pre-cotillion or cotillion? Is anyone in here a lesbian or lesbian identified? In the 1970s through the 2000s, you might only come to this session today, an LGBTQ plus session, if you were lesbian identified or an ally. Otherwise, you might not want to be seen in the room. Any association with LGBTQ plus presentations or events could be interpreted as you are a lesbian. For several years, Pat Griffin gave full day and half day workshops on homophobia during AFRID pre-conference days. Her workshops were special events and therefore they required pre-registration. To disaggregate the workshop attendees, name badges were identified with a colored dot in the top right-hand corner. It was fun for me because I searched for the dots throughout the rest of the days of the conference. Some women might have been frightened. The context here is extremely complex, and it is much more than a dichotomy of lesbian and not lesbian. but rather there are multiple identities and their intersections must be considered here. Each identity is dynamic and chaotic based upon what are emergent choices and continuously modified behaviors by our past experiences and continuously varied environments. AI. For me, what connected us here with the pre-cotillion and cotillion was my sexuality, gender identity, feminist leanings within the context of physical education, a socially conservative profession. My experience as a lesbian and coming out so young with peers provided a strong base for me to engage openly in the activities. In a few minutes, you're going to hear from Linda Zwerin, and she's going to reiterate that point about how life in different US and international locales is freer than others, and in some, authenticity is unacceptable. The reason I started with a bit of my lesbian herstory is to situate myself as one person involved in the cotillion activities. Today, on the right and the left, attacks on LGBTQ, drag queens, critical race theory, any theory for that matter, books, immigrants, has pushed us back to a time when individuals are held captive by fear and homophobia, xenophobia, and all the rest. Many of our most important women mentor acquaintances and close relationships emanated from the pre-cotillion and cotillion. My closest friends came from my professional career because of what we gained from having this rare connection in our professional lives and interests, a place for sisterhood, networking, mentorship, support, and wow, did we dance.
In 1982, the dear departed Joy DeCincy and I were second-year assistant professors at Rice in Houston. We were overworked and underappreciated. When our grievances hit a tipping point, we would debrief during happy hour at Kindred Spirits, a nice women's bar near campus. Houston was the host city for the upcoming AFER convention, and we were both taking on numerous tasks and expecting house guests. For example, Joy was the local liaison for the Amy Morris Homans luncheon, and it was driving her batty. She was working with the Hyatt, and every time she got some detail settled, her overseers in the Southern Association of Physical Education for College Women would overrule it. As she explained this with a Stella in hand and Funky Town on the sound system, it became clear that we needed a counter event. That is, instead of at noon, we would meet at night. Instead of eating, we would drink. Instead of speeches, we would have music. Instead of sitting, we would dance. Such an event could only be called a cotillion, an Amy Morris Homans cotillion. We made a list of all the women we knew who were coming to AFER and reserved a table for 52. The first cotillion was held on a Saturday night, and everyone was exhausted by then. My guests and I did not stay a long time, but when we left, there was a line of women around the building waiting to get in. Some were twitchy with excitement because there was a national gym teacher convention in town. The cotillion became an annual evolving event at AFER. In the early years, I used a bar guide to find a venue. When I got to town, I'd do a site visit and post notices on the convention board. A note for Amy had half the address and time, and a note for Morris had the other half. A secret in plain sight. That formula hit a snag in Las Vegas in 1987. Before I could post notices, word went around of a bar that was a very expensive cab ride away. So I rented a van for the price of a cab ride and ran a shuttle to and from the convention hotels. The next year in Kansas City, I made arrangements with a bar ahead of time and mailed out flyers to the regulars, otherwise known as borderline radical feminists. Okay. In New Orleans, the following year, we took over a gay guest house. The Frenchman and had commemorative T-shirts. Okay. Over time, as women's bars began to shutter, it became more of a challenge to find a venue. I tried to be mindful of the lowest common denominator of timidity and distance away from the convention hotels. Sometimes a good bar would be rejected because it was running karaoke night. Ideally, a bar would have a dance floor and DJ, space for conversation, and women owners. When negotiating with bar owners, I tried to sell the idea that they could host a party for hundreds of bright, athletic women, or as I called it, every woman's fantasy. After finding each venue, I called Joy to consult and then mailed out dozens of flyers. We got to visit iconic bars such as Amelia's in San Francisco and Charlene's in New Orleans. In fact, Charlene wore a tuxedo and said the cotillion was the proudest night of her life. Overall, there were 6 T-shirt designs with a choice of colors in some cases. In 2006, the flyers converted to email instead of snail mail. As AFER declined and the regulars aged, cotillion attendance began to drop off significantly from more than 200 to 2. At 12:01 on April 4th, 2014, I turned 65, the cotillion retired. For 33 years, I just thought I was organizing a party in women's space for my friends.
Oh.
Bobby Bennett, I think you're next.
Oh, am I? Okay.
Or are we going to go to video of Linda first?
Matters not.
Video first.
Okay, we'll do video of Linda's wearing
Okay.
first.
Sorry, folks. Here it goes.
Just raise your hands if you can hear me. Yay! I'm Linda Zwerin from Long Beach, New York. Sorry I couldn't be there, very sorry. While the cotillion was held every Thursday night and it was Thursday night at AFID, which is American Alliance of Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. We would all go out dancing thanks to Jackie's being able to arrange for us to go, and I'm sure Jackie will go into more detail. I was part of the pre-cotillion. The pre-cotillion was before we went out. I guess way back in the 80s. Oh, by the way, I am wearing my cotillion shirt, the cotillion shirt from Kansas City in 1988. One AFID, a few people stopped by at our room before going out to the cotillion. So the core group, which I'm sure somebody will mention, Pat Griffin, Karen DePore, Emily, myself, maybe Pat Del Rey, Grace Goskop, we decided we should get a suite. So from, I don't even know what year we started. All of us would arrange for a suite, and then we would go out and buy wine and beer, enough beer to fill the tub in the bathroom, and soda and nibbles, and bring it into the hotel. Of course, we had to sneak in wine and the beer in suitcases, because otherwise we'd suffer a corkage fee. So the pre-cotillion was always held at the suite in the hotel, so that for some people, the pre-cotillion became a safer place to come and party or hang out with other women who were mostly lesbians. And it was safer for them than to go out to a public bar. So the pre-cotillion had its own place in the secret society. The main problem was to get the message out, was to be able to tell people where the suite was and where we were going to hold the cotillion, the dance, where the bar was. We couldn't print it in AFID convention booklet like other socials. Of course, they didn't want lesbian and gay and women event in their convention booklet. So I'm sure Jackie will talk about how we got the message out through the message board under Amy. One part was under Amy, one was under Morris, and the third part was under Cotillion. I forgot, Homans, right. Anyway, we even had, one year we had cards to hand out, and on the back, we would tell you where it was. So the issue became that some people never got to hear it, didn't get to know where we were going. And we were once accused of being exclusive. Of course, we were not. It was a problem of how to get the message out. I just want to mention a couple of things. We did spread to other organizations. I was a board member of ACSM. And while we didn't have a cotillion, we would go out dancing Thursday night. But I was approached by the president of ACSM not to hold the cotillion, not because being a woman and president was enough. She didn't need an additional stigma of having a lesbian group meet. And then in 2019, I guess pre-COVID, when we presented at NAHKE, N-A-H-K-E, I don't know how to say it. Anyway, we presented, and at the dinner speech, the presenter had to make sure she let everybody know that she was a heterosexual. So the question is, did we really change the culture? I mean, I loved doing the pre-cotillion, and I realized that while I'm in New York, I could go out anytime, well, most times, to a bar or with other women. That for some of the women who attended AFID, they only had this time that they could go out and be among women, and they looked forward. And I didn't realize that until several years into the cotillion. So, bye.
Emily, thank you for bringing us Linda. Emily, thank you for bringing Linda into the room with us. Bonnie Bennett next.
Thank you, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with all of us today. I had to tell you one anecdote that just came to mind, and this happened when I was 13 years old, And in my homeroom in high school, I was hiding the book, The Well of Loneliness, beside some other notes. And my homeroom teacher came along and shut the book. She'd seen me. She said, "We don't read things like that." My task here today is to speak about the meaning and significance of the Amy Morris Homans Cotillion. But my sense of these meanings are necessarily my own. My pre-war birth date, and that's the Second World War, folks, my age and background at the time of significant social justice movements in the 50s and 60s, my personal experiences as a white, lesbian, Jewish, female physical educator, even my locations in Madison, Wisconsin in the 60s and in San Francisco beginning in the early 70s, all of these and more helped to shape my sense of the meanings of the cotillion. So just a little background. The year is 1959. The place is Urbana, Illinois. The weather is lousy. It's 20 degrees. The wind is blowing. There's a blizzard. The question is, how do you identify the women who are physical education majors? Well, the answer is we were the only fools on campus wearing skirts. Everybody else was wearing slacks, but we had a dress code, you see. Never appear on campus in pants. Sneakers and shorts were for the gym only. Our foremothers taught us this as they had been taught by their teachers, some by Amy Morris Homans herself. They carved out a space for us to play, to move, to be athletes, partly by making sure that we looked right. Appearance wasn't everything, though. We must also behave properly, speak properly, avoid special friendships. And if we found a special friend, and I will tell you many of us did, we must not talk about it, not ever. It was truly the love that dared not speak its name. But for whom? Look right for whom? Act right for whom? Behave right for whom? Remain silent for whom? Toni Morrison speaks of the white gaze, the need for Black writers writing about Black lives to explain, to accommodate, to modify their works for the pleasure and approval of white readers. For women physical educators, it was, and in some quarters I think remains, the straight, white, male gaze that fell upon us. A gaze from those who had defined who and what women should and should not be. The straight white male gaze also defined how people of color in our field should behave and literally how they needed to see if they wanted to stay in our field. The straight white male gaze defined how differently abled people should behave and how they needed to see if they wanted to stay in our field. One does not need to be straight, white, and male to learn to see or to pretend to see the world through those eyes. For some, it is a survival mechanism. Now, while this gaze falls on all women, it is a tool to enforce the heterosexist imperative. But for us, it was particularly targeted and odious. It was heterosexism aimed at women who dared to contest the sacred male spaces of sport, strength, and the bodily celebration of self. Often the gazers' expectations were communicated to us by ourselves, our teachers, our colleagues, our professional associations, through a sort of colonialism of the mind. And isn't that how colonialism works best? Get those who are colonized to take control of their own behavior, to meet the expectations of the colonizers. We were our own enforcers. We learned proper comportment, including Homans' directive to speak in a soft and pleasant voice. We learned how to dress, how to pour tea, how to laugh at homophobic jokes, jokes that were directed against us. In short, we learned that we must pass, and we learned how to pass. We learned to lie. Now, lies take a toll. They change the liar. Passing takes a toll. The result is self-directed homophobia. The result is deep, deep closets. But in the darkness of our collective closets, we found each other. We found each other in lesbian bars, bars that were under the gaze of the mob and of the police. We found each other at house parties. We found each other at private evening parties in one another's rooms, at Western Society, at AFERD, at NAPECW, at NACAHE, however you say it, Linda. I dare say at NASH as well. We wanted community. To borrow from Henry Louis Gates, we wanted and needed our own joy, lesbian joy. But we never ever spoke the word lesbian. We were only partly on the way to the freedom from heterosexist, straight, white, male gaze. There was fear. Sally Gerhardt said, paranoia is a heightened sense of reality. You were right, dear Sally. We could have lost our jobs, our families, our children. We could have been sent to jail for not wearing 3 pieces of women's clothing when the police brought the Black Mariah to take us away. Even in those after hours room parties, we dared not speak the word lesbian, far be it queer or dyke. Even to each other, we were our own enforcers. But we hungered to be ourselves. We hungered for lesbian joy, for community, for safety, for an existence that did not reference or bow to the straight white male gaze. We wanted to gaze upon ourselves and each other openly, freely, joyfully. We hungered to overcome fear. At one point at an AFERD conference, my partner Eula and I posted a few notices in conspicuous places for a meeting of, oh, how did we say it? We may have actually said gay and lesbian, I don't remember. Anyway, we went to the appointed place and there we sat. 2 people showed up, as I remember, Jan Felshen and Idri Verdun. We visited a bit, we were sad together, and then we went home. The time wasn't right. But then the time was right. The cultural context was changing and the bravery was right. Feminism was emerging among us. And by among us, I'm now speaking of women physical education people. Piercing our fears, perhaps aided by the bravery of some of our lesbian feminist sisters in other disciplines. At APERD, some women began to challenge the gaze. Pat Griffin gave workshops. Carol Christensen created a People Against Homophobia social. There were a few panel discussions. They filled the room. And yet, where was the joy? Where was the joy? These were quite academic. They were very serious meetings and they were important. But where was the celebration of ourselves? And then Jackie and Joy ignited the celebration. They ignited an idea, space, place to reject the gaze and to claim ourselves even within the context of a professional conference, to create true and public lesbian joy. Oh yes, we tiptoed into the bar with some level of angst and fear. We looked around at each other. We smiled, we laughed, and then we danced. And this to me is the significance and meaning of the Amy Morris Homans Cotillion. It was that moment in our professional lives and in our personal lives and in our political lives when we said to each other and to our colleagues, we will be who we are. We will dance together, speak together, laugh together at a professional conference and in a public place. We will celebrate ourselves and each other. We will reject the self-inflicted homophobia that was never, never self-inflicted after all. No longer will we allow ourselves to be defined by someone else's gaze. We will define ourselves. Creating and attending the cotillion were profoundly personal and political acts. The poet Marge Percy said, "In using, there are always 2. The manipulator dances with a partner who cons herself. There are lies that glow so brightly, we consent to give a finger and then an arm to let them burn." The cotillion was one of those critical events at a critical moment when we stopped giving our fingers and our arms to support the lies that were used against us, the lies that were used to control us, the lies that were expressed in the white, straight, male gaze. We gazed back with assurance and with joy. RuPaul says, and I love this quote, "You're born naked and the rest is drag." I'll ask you this. Who gets to say what your drag will be? Who gets to weave the story of your life? I hope it is you, yourself. We are not what the straight white male gaze says we must be. We're not what anybody's gaze says we must be. Cis or trans, lesbian or straight, gay or bi or non, or defying all labels, we are each of us what we know and say we must be. We celebrate ourselves. The sisterhood of joy that we found at the cotillion remains in our lives. It certainly remains in my life. It is a bright part of my celebration of my friends and of myself. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bobby. Karen DePaul is going to bring us home.
Yep, I'm gonna bring us home. It is a pleasure to be here. And it's hard to be last because so many things have already been said. But it's a pleasure too, because I can hopefully bring some themes and support some of the things that have been said by my colleagues. And I feel the need to say my t-shirts are back. Some of my t-shirts are back there, but I am wearing the pin. So we're all in unity here. We shared a lot about the societal context and the historical context for the times in which the cotillion and the pre-cotillion were formed. And yes, change has been made, but hasn't really. And that's already come up a little bit. You heard some of the history of the cotillion and the pre-cotillion, and I want to add more about the pre-cotillion and offer some kind of reflections. And as you know, Linda said, well, we started as a small gathering just in the rooms of the hotel rooms, and we had to expand because of the interest, and we had to get a larger room. And as has been said, you know, we went to the suite concept, and we had to do that for more space, but more bathtubs, so we could put in the beer, wine, and drinks. And so some of the visuals that I have, we had a core of people who stayed in the room, and that core got larger as we had more space. But it fell primarily to Linda and I to do the Thursday morning jaunting around, trying to find all of the places where we could buy the food, and some food and some drinks. And then we would all pitch in and have the event. Linda talked about the suitcases. Well, I wasn't going to say this, but now I am. It was my suitcase that broke in San Francisco. And, you know, San Francisco has nothing but a lot of hills. And so that was kind of interesting to see 3 or 4 or 5 of us going with suitcases and one popping open. And anyway, you get that, you know, you get that story. So we went from a small group to, I think the largest pre-cotillion was in Portland. We had several around the size of 150. And I think it was Emily that already said we were visited by the police, hotel police. And I think it was Emily and I, or Linda and I, out in the hallway when we saw them coming. And so that was kind of exciting. One of the years of the pre-cotillion, I was a cotillion and pre-cotillion, I was president of NAPIHE. And so in that role, I had the responsibility to carry around the big portrait of Amy Morris Homans and make sure it was at the lecture. And so I figured if I have to haul it around, I'm going to make a copy of it and frame it and turn it into pins. And from that day on, at the pre-cotillion, Amy Morris Homans was there. Another couple of highlights in San Francisco, that infamous San Francisco trip. We had, I thought it was very neat, cool that we had 4 academic deans that joined us. Now that may not seem significant, but there were 4 lesbian women who were not necessarily out, but they came into that space. And so we were able to share that. And that to me was a bit of a milestone that we broke through. We kept the pre-cotillion going until roommates retired, changed jobs, or we've simply found fewer reasons to attend AFERT. It was not the most welcoming, but we all wanted to be there. There are lots of stories and memories, and we won't get into all of that unless you force us to talk about some of those fun times. But I do want to just share two quick ones and then move on. There was a high school physical education teacher who every year I would run into her. I think she was trying to find me, so she knew where to go. And what she said to me, this is the best part of my year, is I get to hang with people like me. And so that was special. Another one, I think it happened to Emily, was this one young woman came running up, where's the pavilion? Where's the pavilion? And she was pretty close. So we had to, you know, she did attend the cotillion and probably the, you know, the pre-cotillion. So I want to share some reflections and impact of the cotillion and pre-cotillion. It was about a sense of community, a sense of belonging. It was about connections. It was a celebration of sisterhood that we didn't know we could have or even wanted to have, but now we knew we could have it. It was respite from the outside world and its hassles, including, as Bobby has talked about, the white male gaze. Let me also indicate that it was the gaze, white male, able-bodied heterosexual, you know, male gaze that was the dominant one that we all live with. Everyone in the room lives with that to some extent. I should also add Christian, white, anyway, you know that list. The cotillion and pre-cotillion were spaces of acceptance, which we didn't always have outside of that space. And you heard Bobby talking a little bit about that. It was a safe and brave space with wonderful and often unexpected conversations. It didn't matter what our title was, our discipline, our age, and more. We were accepted. We were in that space. The pre-cotillion, as has been mentioned, provided a space and place in community for many of those who were not really ready to be out of their comfort zone. And that might change over time, but that was one of the values of the pre-cotillion. We could find each other at associations and other conferences, and we did. We smiled so much on Fridays year after year and looked forward to AFERD. I know it's shaped, but AFERD, and look forward to Thursday and those that we could see on Friday. We didn't have to divulge why we smiled and laughed. And that was empowering in many ways. It was our secret. It was the stealth factor that contributed to the specialness. We didn't necessarily know names, or at least I didn't know everybody's name, but we did know the faces, the smiles, the laughs, and some dance moves. We trusted each other, enjoying the shared experience of sisterhood that many other places in the world would not want us to enjoy. There are so many stories and memories, but no photos. No photos because that was the pre-cell phone. But I think that also was very helpful because we weren't influenced by the social media today and pictures. Now, I think it's unfortunate that we don't have photos because it would have been, you know, really cool. So what we have are the artifacts back there and the memories, you know, that we have. Yes, we were mostly, you know, white, able-bodied women. Many straight women joined us. Many women of color joined us as well, but we didn't, it wasn't expansive as we would have liked. One year, we actually invited some gay guys, and that didn't work out very well. And it's nothing against them. It was just, it reinforced how important that all female space was. It was a community that we were choosing. But we didn't reach everyone, as was said, and sometimes we were criticized for being exclusive. And here I want to share a story about when I was working at Washington State University and we were interviewing a candidate for a job. And my partner and I invited this young woman over to the house and we talked about AFERD and what program, conferences she went to. And she says, there was something that really bothered me at AFERD because there was this group of women who would have this event and I wasn't invited. And my partner's looking at me and I'm going, okay, I need to talk about this and explain the situation. And I just kind of said, yeah, I was one of those individuals. But the take home message was, from my perspective, is that we didn't reach everybody and we couldn't. And this is where I think an organization like AFERD and others, or NASH, could be more visible and make a more inclusive space. We did, and I want to make just a couple of comments about the importance of the cotillion and pre-cotillion beyond that AFERD space. It did extend to other associations, some related to kinesiology in the broadest sense, and some outside, more in the sport arena or women's studies. And although we might see each other there, and we did not see each other on a regular basis except once a year, I know there were strong ties, lifelong friendships, and the ability to connect when needed. And if you will just allow me another kind of personal story, and I want to thank, here's the story. I was hired at Virginia Tech as vice president and dean for graduate education. My partner and I were signed contracts for jobs at Virginia Tech. We bought a house, sold a house, bought a house, and started to move to Virginia Tech. The Board of Visitors took my partner's name off of the hiring list. And it was because of an anonymous email to me and to the board saying, you come from second-rate school, you come from, your degree's not an R1, many other things, and a link, and they kill gays in Roanoke. And with a link to the actual killing. And I still get a little shaky every time I talk about it. And the board was convinced that they should not hire her, my partner. She was a tenured associate professor of African-American literature and English. So they took her name off. And then it was written up in the Chronicle and all of that. But there's many positive things that came out of that, is because of the cotillion and the lifelong friends that we had. Emily, in particular, convinced the Board of Governors of AFERD to write a letter in support of rehiring my partner and taking issues. So that was a public stance. The National Academy of Kinesiology did that as well. And I know there's some people in the room, members of the academy. And so what happened after all of that, my partner did get her job. Ultimately, it took 6 months, but it only took 6 months in some ways. But we went, and the coalition that was built across the gay, the women, the Black communities really coalesced. And I attribute a lot of that to those people who were connected in community, and give a lot of credit to Emily. There's been a lot of progress made, but I think we're going backwards. Right now we see too many things happening. And I think there needs to be strong leadership in the broadest sense of kinesiology. And we need to do activism, allyship, if you will, and advocacy. And I really would like to see us collectively, this organization and others, stand up and help the various communities, the LGBTQ, as we're talking about here, and others. I know there's a lot of work that is ongoing, but it's still not as visible as it could be. Silence, it was years ago and is the voice of complicity, and we can't be silent anymore. So thank you for having us here. This is one step, another step in making our experiences, our history, and others more visible. So I very much appreciate that for including us on the program. And my final thought is, wouldn't it be nice if we could all dance like no one was watching? Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We would love to hear your questions for the panelists. And if you'd go up to the microphone, Shelley Lucas.
Oh, there's Shelley.
Turn around and wave at them.
Hi, Bobby. Hi, Emily. Well, that's
Hi,
loud.
Shelley.
So first of all, thank you, Karen and Jackie and Emily and Bobby and Linda for sharing your stories about the cotillion. I will say I've been to one pre-cotillion in Cincinnati. I'm not usually an AFERD member, but the reputation of the cotillion preceded me, and so I had to take part when I could, and it was an amazing experience. But my question, and whoever wants to answer, were you ever surprised by who you saw there, right? At either the pre-cotillion or the cotillion, like you didn't expect to see that person and now you found a new community member? Or did you ever, for lack of better words, get in trouble for being seen? Did someone like out you, report you to someone who maybe had power and influence over your career?
Good questions.
Well, so I never had a negative experience. I can't say I was really surprised. I think most of us have some gaydar that helped a little bit. But the one time this was a benefit to me is I went on a job interview and I was at dinner just before the interview started with the search committee. It was a large group, and I was off on this banquet with one of the members on the search committee. And she just said, "Psst, have you ever heard of the cotillion?" And this was over 25 years ago, so that may not be an ethical interview question now. But that was my dilemma, because I really needed a job. What could I say? And I said, yeah, I started it. And I got the job, and everything was fine. So that's the one place it really worked in my favor.
Anybody else want to address Shelley's question?
I would just answer it by repeating something that I said in the paper, which is, I think that there were truly unspoken rules, and some people abided by them and some people didn't. But if you saw somebody in the cotillion and then you saw them at another event outside of that, it was really off limits to bring it up. You know, oh, what a great time we had last night, or unless you really knew that that person was out like I was out, and it would be safe to do that with that person. But I also knew the ones that I couldn't do that with, even though I was very clear about knowing about their sexuality, but nobody else did. And no, it never affected me. I was very fortunate.
Another question from Rita Liberti.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all.
Hey, Rita.
Hey, this is sort of less a question. It's more a comment for the Nashers in the room. First of all, having this panel is really, really important. Especially, I've been a member of Nash for 25 years, I guess. I know there are folks in the room that have been members far longer. But it's one of the things I think that Nash has plenty of strengths. But I think in terms of the work that we do around inclusivity and how we study history, I think gay and lesbian history has been sort of not just marginalized, I think it's pretty much been erased, not just in the workings of Nash as an organization, but the work that we do in terms of studying the past. And so again, it's less a question and just a thank you to you all for making this visible. It might be 2023, but organizationally, I think Nash still has a long way to go. So thanks for pushing us.
Thanks, Rita.
Can I comment?
Bobby, go ahead.
Thank you. Perhaps to Rita's point, I remember an AFRID conference years ago, and I can't tell you where it was. I think Celeste Ulrich was the president. There was a public issue. It may have had to do with gay and lesbian rights. It may have had to do with abortion rights that long ago. I can't remember. But at any rate, there was some push among the membership, among some of us, that for AFRID to take a stance. And the powers that be put forth the position that as a professional association, this was outside their venue. That they had to keep their brief, if you will, separate from the general political brief in the world in which they existed. I think that's a notion that needs to be challenged.
Yes, thank you. Vicky has a question.
Hi, we've been struggling with the question of, with EDID stuff, how you shift from inclusion to belonging. And it seemed to me from what you shared, which was absolutely wonderful, that you had sorted through how to belong in AFRID. And I wondered if you could give some hints on what you think are the strategies that shift us from, we're definitely committed to trying to move to belonging for every individual as opposed to just inclusion. So I'd really appreciate your insights.
It's a good question. It's a hard question, and especially given all of the things that are happening with DEI right now. I think that the conversation, getting people in a space, getting into community, inviting people. In my other job in life, part of what I was doing was building graduate community. And I found it very successful to be in that space, to be hearing, listening, and sharing. And that happened with the cotillion and the pre-cotillion, although it was designed for those of us who wanted to be in that woman's space. And most of those individuals were lesbian. So I think it's just, it's too simple of an answer, but it is the bringing people together and providing opportunities to make sure that people can hear, speak, listen. It's a safe and brave place, and it goes from there.
Bobby or Emily, do you have any thoughts about strategies for moving from inclusion to belonging?
I don't know if I do or not, but I'm going to share something with you. Shirley Chisholm said famously, if they won't give you a chair at the table, bring your own. Then I think it's up to the rest of us to make sure that there's plenty of space for that chair, to make sure that that chair is more than tokenism, to make sure that the person sitting in that chair has a real and true voice and gets our support. That seems to me to be so apparent and so obvious, perhaps it's not worth saying, but sometimes we're still embedded in tokenism, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. Another question from the floor?
So I want to thank all of you for coming. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you all very much.
Bye.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.
To my teammates.
Are we hanging in?
I'm gonna hang up,
You're gonna hang up or are we hanging in for a debrief?
hang up. We can
Hang
hang
up?
up. Yeah.
Okay.